Okay, this is for the word wolf, and it is inspired by a story. Not a necessary story. A story I was thinking of when I was younger, because I would collect these figures. They're called Schleich figurines from Germany, and they made like so many different types. Like I collected horses, wild animals, farm animals, elves, unicorns, all that sort of stuff. And I created my own world with these figures because they were also obviously toys. So they were collectibles, but they were also toys. So I would remember playing with them and creating my own stories with them. And I created this like magical world in which a character was transported, and suddenly she realised that she was related to like the royalty of this fantasy world that exists like in a parallel universe. So it was very much an experience inspired by Narnia when I was younger. But this is a sort of retelling of those stories that I would have come up with, because I've never actually written it all down, even though it's all in my memory, and I could probably write a pretty good book about it. But it's just so nostalgic for me, because when I was writing this, I also got out some of those figurines that I still have, and I would look at them, and it just reminded me of my childhood when writing this. It's for Wolf. Alsan entered the forest quite precariously. She had been warned not to do so, most recently by her friend Leet. He whinnied and told her explicitly not to go to the dark side of the forest where the light of Son does not touch. That was about an hour ago. She left Leet in the glen as he grazed with other Pegasi and went in search of mystery. She passed gnarled trees that had faces shaped with horror and fright. No birds chirped, which was most certainly unusual, as in the great land of Saranya. Birds fly freely everywhere and sing their songs at all hours for everyone to hear. The only thing she could hear was the rustle of the saddened trees and the twigs that broke underneath her bare feet. It was not yet dark hours, as the sun was still shining in the sky, but its warm light did not pierce the canopy. Alsan walked with trepidation. Her heart was beating ferociously, and every sound she heard made her jump with anxiety. A wolf howled in the distance, but it was not as distant as Alsan would have liked. She stopped where she stood and looked around at all sides for where the howl came from. Her head whipped back and forth. She felt lost and alone as she became something's prey. She heard low growling coming closer to her. She could not locate from whence it came. She turned and suddenly noticed two perfect orbs of yellow staring at her. The creature moved forward, and it was bigger than any wolf she had ever seen in any zoo on earth. He was enormous. He stood proud. He growled at her. He growled at her. As he growled at her, many of his children arrived at his side and circled Alsan where she stood. She was surrounded by an entire pack. She did not know what to do. "Wait, my children. Do not feast yet," a voice said. It was the magnificent wolf who spoke. Like many creatures in Saranya, he spoke with his mind, and as his mouth was instead a tool primarily for ripping and maiming. "Who are you?" Alsan tried to speak with bravery, but could not help her words from stuttering in fear. "I am Jakob, king of the wolves, and you have trespassed." He pawed at the ground, and his children yipped and yapped in agreement. "The laws of Saranya clearly dictate that you now belong to us." "What are you going to do with me?" she said, quivering. She saw no point in trying to hide her terror from them. They could smell it on her. She reeked of fear. "Whatever pleases us." He barked at his children, but before they could descend on Alsan, a mighty flapping was heard. The canopy was broken, and the sun shined through onto the trees. The wolf scurried away from its light as if it would burn them. Leet flew down and landed with a thud on his hooves. He whinnied and buckled. He whinnied, bucked, and kicked. The wolf scuffled away but kept close. "Get on now," said Leet. Alsan listened to him and jumped on his back as quickly as she could. She grasped onto his mane and was careful not to touch his sensitive wings. He reared up and hit the ground so that it trembled. Arsene clenched her eyes shut, and the Wolf King barked at his children to stay back as Leet took off. The next thing Arsene knew, she could feel the wind in her face, the sun gently caressing her skin, and her heart felt leaden with guilt. I hope you enjoyed that. I really should write out the stories for that, for the world I created when I was younger, Saranya. A lot of it is inspired by German folklore, because obviously the the figurines were from Germany, so a lot of them had German names, and I also had this book of the elves, which populate Saranya, and it was written in German, so I took a lot of it from that. So, for example, Jakob, and in Saranya it's not called the sun, it's called the Sonne, which is Sonne, which is sun in German. So lots of my roots are explored in that, which is really interesting.